take a clean brush and hold my paper towel in this hand, and I'm going to go through here and just soften these transitions. And right now I'm only working on the area where I see the darkest blue. And I'm doing that with smaller brush strokes. Wipe the brush off. Now I'm going to go to that area where there's a transitional shade of blue. And wiping my brush off, I'm getting down into these areas that are definitely lighter in tone. Let's wipe this off. I want this a little smoother up there. Wipe. When your brush gets too loaded and it starts muddying the color a little bit, you want to clean it off. It's okay that I cover a lot of that tree up because I'm going to be painting tree over it, so that's okay. Coming go over here. I just think that that makes it much more interesting than just taking and blending it all with a soft brush. This still maintains some sort of a textural integrity, which I think enhances it a little bit more. Okay, now to paint the clouds. To paint the clouds, what I'm going to do is mix up the lighter, or the darker value first, which is that shadow color that's underneath. So I'm going to take this blue, and to make gray, I'll add its complement, which the opposite of blue is brown, or orange, and the brown is in the orange family. So I'm going to add a little bit of the white that I have here to that gray mixture, and that gives me sort of that gray color for the cloud. So I'm going to just gently paint this on. When I squint down at those clouds, just where I see the darker masses. I'm not worried yet about middle tone or lighter areas of the clouds. As those clouds go away, the shadows underneath get a little bit lighter. A little bit in there. going to take and just grabbing some of this white. This is not going to be my brightest white of the clouds yet, but so I'm going to just mix some of that in with the gray there. Just, it's very close to white, but not entirely yet. But I'm going to paint this now in simple strokes of where I see the remaining parts of these clouds. I'll come back over this and add the highlights when I'm done. Right now I'm just trying to keep in mind light, fluffy, soft clouds. These are not the finished products. Just feeling that I need to push this a little bit more. That feels better to me. There. It gives it that dusty, faraway feeling. And then these clouds down here near the horizon are going to be a a little bit more visible with that yellow background. Okay. Now I'm going to take and set this down and just soften some of the transition between the transitional areas and the darker area. So this is a clean brush, and I'm just going to use little X's. And when my brush gets sort of dingy, I'm just going to wipe it off. And I'm only transitioning between the middle tone and the shadow because I still want to maintain the integrity of that value for the shadow. You can see I'm wiping my brush off frequently to try to keep the brush clean and my colors from not getting too muddy and away from me. All right, now I'm just going to take the same brush and just soften some of these lighter areas. Again, this is not my highlight yet, but I'm thinking wispy, soft clouds. I just don't want anything to feel heavy and oppressive. Just softness. Just like that. Just kind of let your brush do the skittery little skittery along the edges there. You can let it play with some of the sky and let the edges just sort of fluffy fluff like this. All right, now I'm going to scoop up just some nice, clean, bright white with just the smallest trace of cad yellow, and that will make it feel really sunlit. And so that is my brightest white. And I'm going to use this to help direct the eye through the painting. Just keeping the focus really in this general area down here. So everything's going to kind of point to that area. A little bit more white up in here. All right. Okay. Now one last thing I'm going to do with these clouds. I'm going to take a softer, it's a synthetic, but it's just kind of softer. And I'm just going to flick some of these edges where I really want it to feel lighter. Wiping that off. But I would not recommend using your watercolor brushes for this because unless you plan on just using them solely then after that point for oil paintings, because it's almost impossible to get all of the oil paint and turpentine out of your watercolor brushes. Believe me, I'm speaking from experience. All right, so this is just kind of just softening things a little bit. Okay, so there's that. Okay, now the next step is to work from the background to the foreground. So I'm going to go back to this flat 6-inch and I'm going to mix up this far away land back in there. And back in there, using this puddle that I already have of that background cloud color. I'm going to grab a little bit of alizarin crimson. And there is still, I think, a touch of that burnt sienna in there. So I really like that color. Let's see. Maybe a little bit more white to that. Okay, like that. I'm going to add just a touch of sienna and touch of blue as I paint these hills here. They're a teeny bit closer, that's why I added a little bit more blue and brown to it. Okay, now I'm going to add a little bit more blue and sienna. Oops, I think I got some green in there. Well, I can counter that by putting some yellow ochre in it. This is for this hill that is just a little bit closer. Let's make that a little darker. Ultramarine blue and yellow ochre. That's better. Get that shape back there. pretty close. Okay. Now this hill comes before it in front, and I'm just going to add a little bit more ultramarine blue, sienna, and ochre. That's fine. It might be okay for down here. But as it goes up the slope, it gets darker. So let's add more blue and sienna. Okay. Just keeping that really simple there. All right, now this hill, as it gets a little closer, right into this pile, we're going to make it darker by adding more blue, more sienna, and more yellow ochre. Let's get some of that off the brush. Let's get some more of that in there. Keeping that. That still needs to be darker. Ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. That's better. We're not going to give this very much detail because it doesn't need it. It's way far away. All right, so jumping over to the other side of the ravine, grabbing a little bit more yellow ochre, we're going to paint the front of this piece of land as it comes down. All right, switching gears, I'm going to clean off this size 2 brush. Now that focal area back there, I'm going to take some cad yellow medium and just mix it right into that blue and white. It's almost a very light chartreuse. Let's get a little bit more white in there. A little bit of phthalo green. That's better. That gives us a nice sagey color. And some of these kind of come up the hill. All right, now I'm going to take a little bit of this phthalo green and some yellow ochre. I see it on the slope of this hill. I don't know why I'm using this teeny brush. Let's switch to a bigger one. Taking that. Now I like that this still has that faraway atmospheric color, and some of that bluish gray was still on my brush, so I am just going with it. And we're going to let that define the shape of that slope back there. Okay, so let's get a little bit more of this brighter value up on top. And while I have it on my brush, I'll put some over here too. So far my whole background here is very light, a lot of pastel grays and greens and blues. Let's get some more of that blue. And I just put a little bit more of that blue in there because it kind of looks like that forest carpeting the valley down there. So that goes up the slope there, it's a little bit darker. Maybe a little more sienna as it nears us, it gets closer. Okay. All right, now I'm going to come back in through here and get that darker shadow as I see it up where that hilltop, almost like a mesa, is being cast in shadow from the cloud. And then I'm just going to add a few accents in through here. And over here. Okay. Now, up in this area, there's a sandy cliff, so I want to get that in there. And I'm just going to take some of this color that I already have mixed up on my palette, and I'm going to add some of that yellow ochre right to it. Maybe a little bit of sienna. Just going to cover this whole area with that, and then I'll come back over it with some gray. Just laying in some pieces of the lighter colors. Now I'm going to add the gray. Just taking what's right on my brush, right into that grayish mixture of blue and brown. Now, as we are coming closer to us, I'm going to take this light color that I had used on that cliff while I have it here, and I'm just going to lay in this road. Now, I know that the sun has washed out this photograph and made the road appear like it's kind of glaring. So I am going to darken it with just a little bit with a little bit more yellow ochre and sienna. And then this road here. And paint the grassy areas up here first, and then I'll paint the color over the top of that. Burnt sienna in this mixture of yellow ochre and greens. And it kind of gives us a sort of a taupe brown color, and I'm really just painting that around the road, allowing the direction of my brush stroke to define the form of the ground. There's not much of this in there, just a lot of it up in here. Okay. Now I'm going to squint way down at that picture, grabbing ultramarine blue, yellow ochre, a little bit more sienna. Yeah, that looks good. Now I'm just going to paint this only where I see this darker color, like this. I'll come back through here with sort of it's like kind of a brighter spring grass green that I see in those areas. Squinting down. Again, bearing in mind the lay of the land over here as it slopes down the hill. this way. And then it comes up the hill this way. Just taking this nice dark value here, laying that where I see it. All in this passage in here. I know it's obnoxious. Okay, and I think that that about wraps that passage up, where that's a nice dark mass, just like I did in the no tan study prior to starting. I'm just going to get some of this darker of the tree up in here. All right, I'll make that look more like a tree later. Clean brush. Just cleaning up that edge there. I did not like how that was still looking choppy against the sky. Okay. Now I'm going to do these lighter trees and passages in here. So taking some of this cadmium yellow, lizard or ultramarine blue, a little bit of oil, just the smallest dab, where I see lighter areas of the sun hitting this up in here. And over here. So I think that passage is fine, just to make it look like it's getting some light and some air in there. Now on the other side, a little bit of the cad yellow and the blue. I think that's fine. Let's give this tree some light. The light's coming down around this way. That's fine. All right, and then these hills over here, they're hills. Nice simple pieces of that sunlit green. As it's coming around this area, the light moves this way, so it's more intense over here. A little more yellow. It's hitting some of these trees down in here. Let's take some of that phthalo green, some of that yellow, and a little white. Just a little. It just gives you a nice grassy green that's different than the other shades of green. Just makes it look like maybe there's a different kind of tree back in there. Add some different textural quality. Okay, now we'll get some of these brighter green trees in here. So let's take some of that yellow ochre and mix it with the phthalo green. I think that makes a nice shadow for these deciduous trees down in here. And we'll add some brighter color over the top of those. Oh, that's too bright. Let's add some more ochre to that. A little more sienna in that mixture, I think, will neutralize the green to make it less vibrant. Just a little bit. And then we're going to take some white into that bright yellow mixture to paint some of this light hitting these trees. All right, and then I'll reserve that color. Well, actually, I'll just use it right now. I've got some of this light hitting this big pine tree here. And so I guess we will just put that in right now. That white, yellow ochre, cad yellow. Getting in some of this. I'm just laying this down where I see some of these more stronger passages of greens. And I think I'm going to take and put some more of the sunlight hitting these pine trees back in here, just to give it some of that hillside texture to show that there are pine trees back there behind that. Now you don't want to just be like a typewriter or ears of corn on a cob and just go you definitely want to stagger some of these trees and make some brighter, some darker, and so forth. And in here, I'm holding my brush with my pinky on the back of my canvas or palette. Let's take some of this gray and just lay in, oops, a little bit more sienna. I want some of these rocks back in here. Let's make some of those with a little more highlight. Okay. Bring it down, getting back some more of this green with the other brush. Letting some of those brush strokes define the form of that hillside slope. There you go. Okay, now what I'd like to do is to take this color that I just used on those rocks, a little bit of yellow ochre, a little bit of white, and with some of that gray. I'm going to take my brush and go back and forth like this and push backwards to get a little roll of paint. And I'm going to paint this tree trunk. I can still see where I have it located. Every now and then I'm going to flip my brush over, not painting it all the way so that it's all visible, because sometimes branches and shadows obscure and hide it. So let's just do some of it. Some of these branches come up. These little lines. All right, and then the closer the branches get to the sky, the darker they appear because there's more light around it. I'm going to take some of my palette knife here and just sort of scratch in a few of these extra branches as I see them. I can just kind of scratch those in place. A few of them. Don't go crazy because it's kind of fun. Okay. Now I'm going to do this rock area. I'm going to hold my palette flat so you won't be able to see it, but it's kind of lower, so I want to make sure that it's in there. So I'll show you what I'm mixing. Yellow ochre, burnt sienna. Let's start with that. I do have some blue on this brush. Laying down nice, strong, angular pieces of shadow for the rocks that are outcropping. I'll come back through there with highlights to pull out some more of the interest. And here you can even grab some of that alizarin crimson and the blue for the shadows. And then I'm going to take some of that white and yellow ochre. This will be more of the highlight color. To paint rocks, you want to keep your angles clean and strong and sharp. And don't get muddy with getting all fussy and all that. They can tend to look like piles of potatoes. Okay, so I'm just going to grab a few more little highlights here. And you can get as fussy or as as you want with this. I choose not to get my areas here really fussy, but just to suggest the form. Really, what I wanted to show you with this painting was not a complete oil painting, but to show you how we're going to approach plein air painting so that you can be better equipped to get out there and do it. This approach was very much how we're going to be doing the plein air paintings, and that was my logic behind this. But I wanted to incorporate enough with the greens and the blues and rocks and trees and distance and atmosphere, clouds and skies, so that you could have some of those different tools as we go out into the wilderness. All right. Okay, so that wraps up these first two sessions of painting the landscape from photographs. And I hope that this has been helpful to sort of show you the different ways that we can work through some of the problems of landscape painting from photos and some of those problems with values and colors. Obviously, we don't have so much of a drawing distortion in here, and we'll get more into that as we work on portraits and animals. So for this one, I hope that this has been helpful, and we will jump now into plein air painting. So that's next week. All right, thanks guys.